Right, good evening ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's special meeting of Cabinet, which is a single meeting, and therefore I shall give you notice that item 11 to appoint executives to the Basingstoke Executive Committee, unless an officers can advise me that this has to be done this evening, I will defer until the meeting of the 25th of June. And you can consider that, whether that needs to be done between now and then. We will begin with fire evacuation proceedings. Is there anybody here who doesn't know how to evacuate the building? If you're all aware of that, then we can take those as read, since we've all been here a lot of times. Secondly, just to remind you that the meeting is being webcast. Receive apologies for absence. It is clear that there are 3 members of the Cabinet who are not here this evening. Those are the 3 members of the Many Down Executive Committee, who are by definition therefore conflicted and are not present this evening. Are there any other declarations of interest? No, thank you very much. Then the minutes of the last meeting of the 21st of May will be confirmed on the 25th, and we can move straight through to the substantive issue for decision this evening, which is from the forward plan, the annual housing requirement. Councillor Raffel, would you like to introduce that, please?
Yes, I'd love to introduce this. This has been, for the Planning and Infrastructure Committee, I think, a very interesting journey to get to the figures that it has finally come up with. We have looked at this issue, I think, on a number of occasions over, I think, the last 4 years. And we finally had several pieces of work done. One originally by the officers, which produced a scenario that Cabinet endorsed, which involved a range between 735 and 770 houses, and the Planning and Infrastructure Committee determined that it should have the facts modelled through a demographic model called POP group, conducted by some recognised experts, and that reported back and gave a range of data, and that reported back to the Planning Infrastructure Committee, which then met over the last 2 nights and came up with a recommendation that the majority, which I can say is cross-party, the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, voted for a figure of 748 dwellings per annum. What I'm going to do is read to you my recommendation to Cabinet, and I'll do that now. I have listened to the evidence presented to the Planning and Infrastructure Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 4th and 5th of June 2013 in relation to demographic projections and housing needs assessment. I have noted that the demographic projections include the most recent evidence in relation to the evidence of 2011 headship rates. I have noted that Edge Analytics have used the respected and widely used POP group technology. I have noted that the committee did not challenge the methodology or the outcomes of that modelling and were content to place reliance upon it. I accept that the figure given by Edge Analytics for zero net migration would result in a figure of 550 dwellings per annum being built. It is my view and my recommendation to Cabinet that we must aim to provide homes for the likely internal growth of our borough's population, namely births over deaths. Edge Analytics made it clear at the committee that the previous house building levels dictated their projections. The experts took a 10-year period for inward migration, as this more accurately reflected the borough's historical inward migration, rather than a 5-year period where there have been a surge in completions for new homes. They determined that a figure of 748 dwellings being built per annum was a realistic projection based upon robust and well-recognised modelling and recent accurate data. The committee did not dissent from this analysis, and I accept in my recommendation to the Cabinet, I accept this view. In effect, this figure included a level of net internal and net international migration of 198 dwellings per annum being built. Therefore, the real issue for me to determine is the correct level of net internal and net international migration, and for the Cabinet to determine that too. It is my view that an element of inward migration is inevitable, because in an open market there are many people who may wish to live in the borough for employment, social and economic reasons, regardless of whether they wish to or need to work in the borough. There are also those who seek employment in the borough and for good reason wish to move nearer to their employment. Some of that employment will be replacing those who retire. Some will be in new employment that will be created in the lifetime of the plan. Any annual house building figure must include an element of internal migration, as without it, the borough could not build sufficient homes for its own natural growth, as a proportion of those new homes in a zero net migration scenario would inevitably be bought by internal migrants to the borough. Moreover, the government requires us through the National Planning Policy Framework to take account of internal migration. I have considered the evidence from a new homes consultation with the borough's residents, which was presented to the Planning and Infrastructure Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 17th of February 2011, where there was a common view that the majority of respondents felt that too much development had taken place in the borough over the last 10 years. Therefore, my recommendation for determining the level of net internal and net international migration is based primarily on doing what is right for the borough of Basingstoke and Deane in the light of the available evidence. I also have regard to the evidence presented to the committee in the past 12 months as part of the local plan process, which has demonstrated that recent development has contributed to infrastructure issues, in particular in relation to transport. Therefore, any housing figure that takes account of a figure for inward migration should recognise that there are good reasons for restricting that figure to a figure that is appropriate to fulfil the economic needs of the borough and not the aspirational needs of the rest of the country. However, I note that the Edge Analytics report showed that the level of housing required for natural change, that being internal growth, has been less than half of the number of houses built in 3 of the last 8 years. Yet the employment rate within the borough and the unemployment rates have remained fairly static, despite the increase in population related to that increase in dwellings which were completed over the last 8 years. Edge Analytics had recorded that there was currently a net outflow of commuters. This would suggest that there is not a shortfall in homes for the workers in the borough, nor a shortfall in jobs at this time, and that the economic reasons for an element of new homes for internal migration may have been oversupplied in recent years. Edge Analytics indicated that net international migration is a small component in the inward migration to the borough. They calculated that should the government be successful in fulfilling its objective to reduce net international migration to no more than plus 100,000 by June 2015, then the housing figure, based on the 10-year net internal migration, 5-year net international migration scenario scaled to plus 100,000 in June 2015, would result in a projected figure of 745 dwellings per annum being built. In other words, 3 less than their other figure. I note also that the recent housing needs assessment in 5 of the scenarios resulted in an average housing need of around 300 affordable dwellings per annum being built. Our current policy of 40% of new homes being built being affordable would suggest that a figure of 748 could contribute to achieving this objective. I note that the borough's officers produced a dwelling-led scenario which was reviewed by Edge Analytics and described by them as a good and thorough piece of work. This suggested that a housing figure should be in a range of between 735 and 770 dwellings per annum. This range is viewed by officers as supportive of economic growth and may help to sustain levels of employment in the medium term, particularly with in-migration to the borough accounted for. This range is likely to secure economic growth, particularly if more of the population continue working beyond the current retirement age, and they said that the range is also more likely to support existing businesses and services. Therefore, taking all of these factors into consideration, I recommend to Cabinet that the annual house building figure for the lifetime of the local plan should be 748 dwellings per annum.
Thank you, Councillor Ruffell. We have one speaker this evening, Councillor Tilbury. Councillor Tilbury, if you'd like to come forward. Good evening to you. And as you know the format by now, as yours, you have 2 minutes, and please go ahead.
Yes, first I'd like to thank Mark for the competent job he did chairing the P&I meetings in the past, and his sort of consensual approach to being the portfolio holder. And that's not a criticism of you, Rob. I think you were sort of always hamstrung by the many down issues, but I think at least he's sort of tried to sort of bring everybody on board with this. But I think it's clear that this council has little choice but to back the housing figure of 748 proposed, despite the fact that it's likely to result in levels of development well in excess of those our residents wish to see in their towns and villages, particularly in my village. My concern is that even this figure is unlikely to stand up to the scrutiny of the planning inspector. From the outset, I've always argued that the lower levels of building are only credible if we accept lower levels of economic growth. And as we're doing the exact opposite and encouraging jobs growth in an area of low unemployment, this will inevitably lead to higher demand for housing. The 5,000 jobs we intend to create at Basingstoke alone over the next 10 years suggest the employment-led figure of 936 produced by Edge Analytics is more likely to be viewed as credible. My greatest concern is that the limited amount of affordable housing we are planning for, as I said yesterday, it cannot be credible that when we had 3,500 households on the waiting list, we thought it appropriate to deliver 300 affordable homes a year, yet when we now have nearly twice that figure, it remains the same. Winchester have just had their plan passed, but only after the housing number was increased to 625 a year. Bearing in mind that they have barely 2/3 the population in houses we have on a proportional basis, this would suggest that our needs will be closer to 870 a year.
30 seconds.
Thank you. They are looking at delivering 300 affordable houses a year, the same number as ours, yet their waiting list is also proportionally far smaller than ours. Much of their affordable housing will be delivered by return to building council houses on their own land, which pleases me, but this has the advantage of having at least partially disconnected the delivery of affordable housing from market housing. Their housing numbers are lower than would have been needed to meet the requirements of the MPPF, but I would also make the point that had not come out of any of our meetings.
That's time, so if you could gradually wind
That's it, it's just about the last bit. But,
good man.
But I think if we continue to hope the market will meet locally assessed affordable housing need, I suspect our housing numbers will have to be a lot higher than 748. But for now, I think we'll have to leave that to the planning inspector. I think we've done all we can. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tilbury. Councillor Ruffell, do you wish to respond?
Can I say, first of all, thank you to Councillor Tilbury for all his constructive comments, especially over the last couple of weeks when I have been conducting this process. Can I reassure him that the recommendation that I am making, and hopefully the decision that Cabinet will make, is based upon good and robust evidence that has been tested and examined by the committee. It's been put to the very experienced Edge Analytics who have come up with that figure. And it is also supported by the borough's officers who have their experience in support, put their experience in support of this recommendation too, as you know, because the figure was contained within the paper that went to the P&I committee. Can I say I thank him for his comments and I carry on recommending the matter to the committee.
Councillor Tilbury, do you have a supplementary, or that's fine? Thank you very much indeed for your contribution. Therefore, members, do we have any comments we wish to make upon this? Councillor Donnell?
2 seconds, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Ruffell for the way he's led this in the last few weeks, and also to say that, of course, we do need to keep working, that we need infrastructure with building, and if that doesn't come, the houses won't be able to come. Thank you, Chairman.
Gosh, that was brief. Well done. In that case, I think just to sum up, we have finally arrived at a number after a long process, one which I think has been correctly handled. I would like to, in his absence, compliment Councillor Donald Sherlock, the previous portfolio holder, because it was his idea to go out and take outside advice on the analysis of the numbers, and also to ensure that we use the latest figures. And I think that's been very helpful in providing us with a sound base on which to make a decision. I think also there's been some very constructive comments of what I've seen over the last couple of nights from members from all sides towards the debate in a very collegiate fashion, which is very refreshing and good to see. And it just proves that if one does actually put aside necessarily party issues and try and work together, one arrives at a much sounder decision-making process than otherwise. This is the start of quite a hard couple of months of decision-making until we get to the 25th of July, when the final decision will be made. I think if we can continue in exactly the same way, in the same vein of cooperation and sharing information and dealing with the information in a pragmatic and practical fashion, it bodes very well for the quality of the plan that will be forthcoming for consultation in the summer. So on that note, are we all agreed then that we can agree this figure? We are agreed? Good. Then that is now 748 is the number. Can we just move very briefly to item 14, matters dealt with by portfolio holders under delegated powers? These are for noting. Are we happy to note that? Sorry, yes, Councillor Donnell.
The local nature reserves request for designation, I haven't made the decision yet, so we can't note it.
Well, I note that we can't note it. Thank you. On that, the rest being okay, the meeting is now concluded. Thank you all very much indeed.